Hi, so I'm Anisha, and this is the next episode of What I Tried, What I Learned, where I try to share life lessons learned from being late diagnosed neurodivergent, autistic and ADHD, and a business owner. So today I'm sharing my what I'll call my philosophy of the three levels of how to figure out why like a daily activity or task like maybe it's not quite working for you, and then maybe two elements that you can use to adjust it and make it work better. So this kind of came about as a like my philosophy as a way to handle daily tasks. Says because just even as a kid, just the idea of having to like clean every day, and you can never be done cleaning. There's always something to clean again. Having to do the dishes every day, chores, just those daily routine tasks that just never end. Even as a kid, just the thought of it felt like really heavy, felt like a lot, just a lot to manage. So I guess this is my way of figuring out how to make it just less of a burden, just less of a mental burden. And so that's those my philosophy of three levels. Technically, there will be four levels, but you'll see like the fourth one, I just rarely ever go into that level. Okay, so this is a grid, and because I'm trying to keep making these videos or the podcast episodes very simple on the video, I'll probably just draw like old school YouTube style on the paper, and hopefully it's visible. Um, and then on the podcast, and then for like audio, if you're just listening, I'll try to describe it so it makes sense. But basically, I figured out there's two main factors for me on whether like a task or an activity is simple to do or not, because I try to keep things simple. So those two factors are the time it takes to start the activity and the complexity of the activity, or like how many steps are involved, um, how 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 many things do you have to do before you can say you are done with that task or activity. So I'm going to draw that on my notebook with a Sharpie. So the first line I'm going to draw is that time to start. I guess you can call that setup time, maybe even friction, maybe is a better word, but I want something more descriptive. So I just put time to start. So hopefully that is visible. I'm just showing the line on the paper. I have it as like the x-axis if you're into math. And then the other factor is that complexity. So that's going to be the y-axis. And now I'm just showing that on the paper. So yeah, time to start on the x-axis. So from left to right, there's more and more time to start. And then from complexity as the y-axis, top to bottom. So as you go up more, it's more complex. So those are those two factors. I'm sure there's more, but for me, these are the two I identified as what makes something either harder or simpler for me to do. Okay, so let's go over the levels. In my head, I call them levels, but now I've given them names because one, two, three, four is not very descriptive. So, first level, I'm calling that the energy saver, but that's in this bottom left quadrant. And I'm just drawing that. And I'm put in parentheses, this is level one for me. So, energy saver mode. This is where, oh, sorry, in the video. Sorry if this is not super visible. This is my first time using this. But energy saver level one is basically where there's low time to start and low complexity. So this, I'm going to use the example of food because feeding, making sure I have healthy food to eat can be a lot sometimes, especially if I'm really busy. So for me, the energy saver version of this is eating food that it's like leftovers. So I warm up some leftovers to eat. That's really easy. Time to start is pretty simple. Either if I use a microwave, put in the microwave, in a microwave safe container, or if I use a stove when I didn't have a microwave, just like put it in the pot if because it's usually soup anyway or something. I can just throw in a pot on top of the stove, warm it up, and that is pretty simple. Like time to start, just get the pot, get the food, put it in there, and then it's warm. And also low complexity, because again, it's maybe a few steps, but it's just get the warm the food up, and then I can eat. So that's what I call that level one. I try to keep most things in this level where it's low time to start, not very complex, very simple. And if I can keep most of my activities here as close to this like level as possible, then means I can save my energy for like bigger projects, either that I want to do or that I have to do. Um, and so that's why I call it that energy saver level. Try to live here for most things. Okay, so what I'm gonna call level two, but this depends. This is very subjective naming, and I'll explain that. But level two, I'm gonna call is that setup intensive. So setup intensive. Level two, I'll put a question mark on here because it's subjective. But this is, oh my gosh, there we go. You can see it now. Okay, so this is the low complexity, but high time to start, more friction. So it's setup intensive. And so for a good example that I believe is a good example for this, but very subjective, is meal prepping. So I did try meal prepping years ago, and I call it setup intensive because it might not be complex. Like you can pick a simple meal that doesn't require too many steps to make, but there's a lot of setup, especially if your kitchen is like just a normal one bedroom small kitchen, and maybe you just have like a few pots and pans. So you either need to get more pots and pans to cook and then more containers to store all the food you're going to make for the week, or if you're doing longer than a week, you need more containers, so more setup time. It requires more time cooking spent in the kitchen, so you need to set aside more time in your day to do that. And then even if it's just for one person, but when I was trying it, it was going to be for me and my husband, so it's like more people that I'm prepping for, so which means more food to prep for. So there's a lot of prepping in meal prepping. It is called prepping. So that's why for me that was very setup intensive, and when I tried it, it didn't quite work. And now looking back, I can see very clearly, and as I eventually figured out, the reason I couldn't keep up with it was because of that just time to start. That setup was just so much that I would dread doing it and put off doing it, which would then throw off my plan for the week because I had planned to just warm up food the rest of the week that was already prepped. So it had a domino effect of making the week more hard than it needed to be. So I realized for me, meal prepping did not work because of that just bigger setup time, bigger time required to set aside to do it, if that makes sense. So before I even start cooking, it took up more time on my schedule, in my head, and in the kitchen with supplies. Okay, so next level is I call this one checklist intensive. Also, my handwriting is not the best, so hopefully that is visible. But checklist intensive. And so this level three for me is low time to start, so not much setup time, not much friction, and high complexity, which is why I call it checklist intensive. And so for this one, as an example, let's say maybe I'm cooking chicken soup, because so there can be a lot of steps to make like a good chicken soup. You know, you have to get the vegetables, make sure they're clean, chop the vegetables, and if you're, chopping 4 or 5 different ones that you want to put into the soup, you got to chop all of those. Then you put them in and then season them. And then if you're adding meat the chicken too. Like maybe you have to prep the meat as well. So I would say it's a checklist because you have to do like first this, then this, and then this. But it's not much setup time, at least the way I do it, because you just grab the veggies, you have them, you have your pot, and good to go. Like you can start making chicken soup in, I would say, under 5-10 minutes. Really less than that because I keep it very, very simple. I don't do fine dice. I chop things roughly, more like a Mexican soup, like Mexican caldo. So just big chunks of veggies, throw them in the pot, let it start cooking, and you've got good chicken soup. So the reason for me this is I put level 3 question mark because honestly for me this is more of a level 2 because I can follow a checklist. For me, the biggest barrier to doing something is just that time to start. If there's more friction, if it takes longer to start, I will put it off more because it just takes more of that executive function to get started. And for me, if I can just get started, I'm fine. So I prefer to stay on that like low time to start. And I can deal with higher complexities because the first time you do something, you have your rough checklist, and then the next time you just follow that same checklist and you get better and better at it, and then you don't need the checklist anymore, as long as you're doing the same steps. So for me, this is better, but for some people, maybe they prefer to keep things lower, like less complex, but then they don't mind more time to start, and so for them, that might be level 2. So that's why I say this is very subjective. Okay, the last level is what I call the energy intensive. And this is definitely level 4. So here we go, right over there. So the energy intensive is high complexity and high time to start, and I really do not go into this or do activities like this by choice. I'll say it, let me add by choice. So if I do this by choice, maybe I want to make like a special dish just for fun to try it out, like a new complicated recipe with a lot of steps and a lot of prep time. Another really good example, like a lot of people tried during the pandemic, was making sourdough bread. So if you've made it, I haven't, but I've seen, like people make it, and there's a lot of prep time. You got to get your stuff, make it, and then you got to let it sit, then come back later, do more stuff, let it sit, and then actually bake the bread. So there's a lot of steps, very complex, a lot of setup time. It can take a while to make it. And so for me, I would assign that to level 4, energy intensive. So if I choose to do something like that, like if I have a choice, then I will rarely do it. And then if it's something I have to do, I try to think of ways to either manage the time to start, like make it less time to start, or the complexity. Is there a way I can make this less complex, or make a checklist so I don't have to rely on my brain every single time to perform this activity? So that's all the levels. So like I said, those 2 main factors for me is that time to start and complexity, and I try to minimize those as much as possible. If for you there's other factors that make more of a difference in making like daily tasks easier for you, then maybe you could just take this idea and like substitute it for whatever factors are more important for you. But I just wanted to share this. Hopefully it'll help someone else adjust their daily activities and maybe even bigger activities like work to work better for you. Like for work, for example, I use Notion to create a dashboard and to store information. And my goal of the dashboard, still working on it and adding to it, but the goal is to have everything there so I can just start work. There's less time needed to get started on what I need to do. So that's a work example. You can also use this for work too. It's not just for day-to-day tasks. But yeah, hopefully this is helpful for at least one person, because it's been helpful for me, and I've noticed I share it with people. Like this past year or so, I've been sharing it, and I've just thought like I just need to sit down and actually like write this down so I can share it in a clearer way to people, instead of just saying like, oh, I try to live in level one, because that doesn't make sense without context. All right, well, hopefully you enjoyed this, and come back for future episodes. Subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, so or follow on whatever podcast player you use to listen.